Hello and welcome back, and I'll be honest with you, I'm a realist. I know I'm not the thing that you're looking at on the screen right now. This next to me is the DA400, a NAS that I've been sent to evaluate. And for those that have followed the channel for a while, you'll know I mentioned this in another video a while ago. One of the things I do in the background of this channel, alongside my outside of YouTube life, is I evaluate these systems. They get sent to me by brands and I put together a little report, and it's all nice and it says what it does, what it doesn't, what I would improve and stuff like that. And this is one of the latest devices I received. But I was so perplexed by the design of this thing that I simply had to reach out to the brand and ask them, can I talk about this on the channel way in advance of the review? Because it's a prototype. This is unfinished, by the way. So again, this is not a review. This is just me talking about this, frankly, bizarre looking system. And I know I'm not alone in my feelings about that. Indeed, when I put a few posts out about this, asking what people thought of the design, I can confirm it is not a food processor. It is not a pencil sharpener. It is not a baby bottle sterilizer. It's not an air fryer. It's not an egg cooker. It's not a yogurt maker. It's not a soda stream. It doesn't make popcorn, and it's not a 3D printer or a Mr. Fusion. This is the DA400, a 4-bay NAS solution from the brand StationPC, also connected to a brand called Firefly. Now, do you remember that brand? Well, that's because this isn't the first time we've seen this brand roll out a weird, unusual looking product. Remember this? This toaster looking NAS from well over a year ago? This was the StationPC mobile NAS. This was a 2-bay mobile NAS device. It had two M.2s inside, had a battery inside, it had multiple connections there along with an LCD panel allowing for backing up of your devices and SD cards one click and wirelessly via Wi-Fi 6, but it also allowed you, when you'd get back from your shoot, back from your job, to connect this to the base station that had another M.2 NVMe inside and a 2.5 gig network port to allow you to back up onto that, also back up onto another NAS, back up onto the cloud. It was a very interesting and uniquely designed solution, and I'm getting major kitchen vibes here. But the fact of the matter is, this is clearly a brand that wants to create very stylistic choices in their architecture and design, and I think it would be fair to say that as far as some users are concerned, much like Wesley Snipes once said, some motherfuckers simply have to ice skate uphill. Jokes aside about the design, I will say I kind of love it. You know, this weird plastic perspex thing. I will say there at the top we've got a removable filter as well that uses magnets to sort of keep that on there for you to remove it and clean it out as needed. Also, the individual bays, hopefully you can see it on screen, they use a peculiar cage surround design. So either side of the main 4 bays there's a cover that holds them all in place, but the trays are far more surrounding than other trays that we've seen in other NAS devices before this. Also, there on the front is a real-time information panel about what the CPU, the RAM are doing, individual drive health, the IP, stuff like that. But it also isn't touchscreen. You can't do anything with it. You can't cycle through, for example, or enable or disable features. And I doubt that's something that's going to change during production. Also, in terms of ports and connectivity, this has got a dual 2.5 gig networking. Later on, we will test adding a USB network adapter there. Alongside that, USB connectivity and, of course, an HDMI output as well. There's also front-mounted SD3 backup, one-touch copy button, and an additional USB Type-C and a USB Type-A there mounted on the front. So decent enough hardware on the outside in terms of its design, even if it does look, frankly, effing peculiar. Now, in terms of internal hardware, it arrives with an 8-core ARM processor. We talked about it before, the RK3588, which is technically 2 ARM processor, an A76 and an A55. And alongside that, it arrives with 8 gig of memory as well. Now, the other thing we've got to talk about, alongside that CPU having a low tera operations per second rating and integrated graphics, Mali graphics, of course, is this has an AI accelerator on board as well, something we're starting to see arriving from some brands. There's an AI accelerator known as the RK1828 that is specifically tailored to pair with this processor. It is a 3-core ARM processor with 5 gigabytes of DRAM on there that allows you to improve the performance up to 20 tera operations alongside the CPU as well. This is kind of designed to be a growing home appliance, not a NAS. And again, we're going to start to see more and more of that at the moment. That combined with the overall hardware architecture does make this an intriguing proposition, given some people just want to have a very quirky looking device in their home or office environment. I do think there is an audience for something that looks like this. But this evaluation that I'm doing in the background of the channel isn't just about the hardware, it's about the software. So at least for this video, let's dig into the status of the software right now. Right, so onto the software experience of the DA400. Again, Debian OS, as we've already described. So a lot of this is going to seem pretty darn familiar. For those that watch my enshittification video, you'll know that one of the things I've noticed at the moment is a lot of NAS operating systems have started all kind of looking the same design paths. And I'm not going to say that these guys are particularly breaking the mold, but I will say for a system that is still in prototype, for software that is still very much not finished yet, pretty much all of the bells and whistles that I would like to see are available here. Now, I'm still on the end of my RAID recovery tests. If we go into the storage area there, you're able to see that I've already done a drive pull. It was doing fine there. It's doing a RAID resync. I'm trying to see how long it's going to take. These are 24 TB drives there. But that is going to limit some of the features and functionality that we're going to cover in this preview that will become clear later on. But at least for now, I will say the level of features and service, there's not much missing. Right the way down to the security settings. So for example, whether it is you want port and access control, whether you want to apply two-factor authentication there straight out the gate, auto blocking rules, that kind of stuff going on, firewall rules, different kinds of certificates if you want to use your own Let's Encrypt or whatever. And that goes, by the way, to borrowing individual devices and binding them to individual users and different security protocol from admin to individual groups of users. This is already ready in the software out the gate. I've seen enough a kind of unbaked NAS OS software roll out with first generation devices to be pretty impressed with what I'm seeing here. Obviously they're building off the back of what they had on that Station Pocket mobile NAS. There was already pretty good software as it was, and they've merely expanded upon that. And a lot of that to do, of course, with the AI stuff with the locally deployed LLM. That's something I'm going to save for the full review, if I'm honest. I'm sure the brand would hate me not to include it in this, but I'll be perfectly honest with you. Until I've tested everything else on this device, and I've nailed down the fundamentals, I don't really want to dig too deep into that. But downloading AI models, recommended AI models locally onto the system, taking advantage of that AI accelerator card that's included with it. Really, really straightforward. With recommended pre-tailored models, it is genuinely one click and then it is good to go, and then it deploys on the system, which you can then take advantage of. Individual storage locations, if you do want to take advantage of the M.2, you can direct it at that, or the larger, slower storage, wouldn't recommend that. There is no support ZFS from what I'm seeing here. Not surprised based on that RK chip, but if we use the M.2 inside, not only can we take advantage of the M.2 for caching, but of course we've got it for storage pool utilization as well. BTRFS, ext4, all pretty standard stuff. And again, nailing down the fundamentals very, very well when we've seen some NAS OSs rock out the gate with pretty underbaked storage features. When it comes to accessing the data on this device, the revision of this software right now does allow for SSH level access. You'll be amazed how many NAS operating systems I see come through the doors that don't have SSH out the gate. I find it baffling when they do that. I also find it baffling when they include it and it's turned on. I'm pleased to say, 1, it was turned off by default, and 2, it is available on the software out the gate, alongside DDNS configuration if you choose. And in terms of file sharing protocol, mostly good news with support of Samba, and that also goes right the way down to SMB multi-channel for that matter as well, alongside WebDAV and FTP. There's no NFS, there's no iSCSI, annoyingly, and I know you can do iSCSI on this hardware architecture, so I'm surprised it's not there. Hopefully that is something that's going to be added down the line. But overall, pretty happy with the base level storage. You've got the option of the SSD caching, and indeed you've got snapshot protocol, you've got all the usual recovery methodology you want to see on a NAS device, and checking the individual storage health, what's going on with your drives. As you can see, because we've got that recovery taking place right now, when I've done a drive pull, we're seeing warnings on there, but we can still find out more health information about each individual disk. But it's just at the moment a lot's happening with this box in real time. Also, long time watchers of the the channel will know that one of the earliest things that seems to be weirdly rare in a lot of NAS operating systems when they first roll out the gate is to do with air gapping and hardware control. Whether it is because the base level software is not built in tandem with the hardware, or that the hardware is really just hosting a more general OS rather than true integration and control between the two. I'm pleased to say that alongside that SSH level access and control of the system, we also got something really basic like fan control. You'll be amazed how many systems still don't have comprehensive fan control, which when it comes to noise, when it comes to the ambient environment you are in, proactively managing the temperature, I'm pleased to see is there, alongside memory compression as well. Alongside that, creating air gaps, managing wake on LAN. It's nice to see stuff like this alongside drive hibernation control and more factored into this OS very early doors, which is a very promising sign for a NAS operating system on a turnkey NAS solution that still isn't finished. Now, the approach towards apps and services, I'm going to say, is mostly good, with a caveat there at the end. So when we go to the App Center there, this isn't a NAS that's rolling out with access to like a Docker repo that's just full of thousands and thousands of unnamed and untested containers. This has got a range of tested and curated, I'm going to use that word there, apps that you can install. And currently the version of this device I'm using, these are the ones that are available, with which ones are containerized deployments labeled in green and which ones are in system traditional installs in blue there. You have got a Docker application you can run where you can go into a connected repo to then download the ones that you want. But I will say the ones that they have included in the curated list aren't that shabby. If we go into them, one stands out more than any other. Notwithstanding the fact there is Jellyfin, it's one of the rare ones that actually has Plex being installed. That is weirdly rare these days, and I know it is a containerized appliance nonetheless, but you do have access to a surveillance tool as well as AI agent tools to take advantage of that internal AI accelerator a little bit more to your own needs. Again, I'm glad it isn't just accessing a huge messy repo of other containerized applications, and the fundamentals seem to be there. The ones that are there, I'm not going to say unpolished. For example, like the backup operation one here that you can back up in system folder to folder, back up to the cloud, back up to a USB, utilize one-click backup if you choose to, back up remotely over the network onto local folders and remote access NAS devices. The options are all there, and the options you can choose to use aren't too shabby either, with NAS to NAS, folder to folder, NAS to cloud, and remote access protocol and local network protocol all supported there. So for example, if we go for other NAS location, we'll just randomly select some folders, add that path from the other folder, get that added in here. We can see the backup rules. We've got there whether we're on a schedule or not. We can set it up whether it's incremental or archival in registered date formation. Again, you've got some of the advanced filter options there. I like what I'm seeing here. And the same goes, by the way, if we go into the file folder explorer here. So luckily it is one of those NAS operating systems, thanks to it being built on Debian as well, where we've got those contextual file explorer options built in. It's not the complexity of having to mount it via SMB and rely on your NAS operating system to browse through it. Hell, the File Explorer is actually pretty good for a NAS that's a decent way away from full release there. Everything from the administration view that allows you to overview all of the remote access and what you need and the links, all the way through to when you're doing the remote shares or external sharing and managing it there, or just using the contextual options to create shares. And again, all of the traditional options that you would like to see in sharing, whether it's in or outside of system, what the rules are for expiry, how many times it can be accessed and more, can all be set and managed very, very easily. And if you are going to be connecting an external storage like a USB drive, there are contextual options for backup and access of that as well. So again, for a system a decent way away from people actually having it in their hands, respect. They even do a decent enough job with the resource monitor, something that again I see a lot of more recently released NAS operating systems not really give enough information, or at the very least information being presented in a more chewable fashion, not just lines of code and command line and text. This does allow not only the easy way of looking at RAM, CPU utilization, and indeed breaking into the MPU for the AI stuff as well, but it's just presented a little bit more easily and more chewably, and we've seen some ops do it recently. Now, one big issue I've encountered early doors, something I'm talking to the brand about with this in my evaluation of this device, and something I desperately hope they change architecturally. Whether they do, we'll have to wait and see, is what happens when the system is going through a RAID build or a RAID rebuild. Remember earlier on I mentioned that I've been part of my testing, RAID pull testing on this. I pulled one of my 24 TB drives out of this because I wanted to see, one, what the reaction time would be, two, what the RAID rebuild time would be, and the system overhead. Well, when you do that, it stops you being able to do anything new with the disks. Pre-established pathways, pre-established shares, they're fine. But for example, if I go into the App Center, did you notice how I didn't install any of the apps in front of you? Well, that's because in my own test regimen, I always test the drive failure and drive removal, and in the case of, say, ZFS, RAID resolving and stuff like that, first, before I start adding any apps and services and overhead that could undermine the results. And the problem is, as you saw from that test area, it's still going to take me another 9 hours and 10 minutes to complete that RAID resync there. And if I try to install an app, it won't let me. And again, I'm really hoping this is something that changes by the time this reaches full retail. Not so much during the RAID rebuild, the RAID building, although I would argue if you're going to use big drives like these 24 TBs, it took a little over a day for this to complete the RAID. Not with any extra RAID oomph. I didn't set the resync priority beyond default. But if you lose a drive and you want to put in a drive replacement, rebuilding your RAID array, the idea that you're not going to be able to do anything new with the NAS during that time, you can only access old data, may put some users off. So just be aware of that unless they change this, and if they do change it, I'll cover it in the full review later. This is really the only negative experience I had with this device during my early testing. We've still got large scale network testing. I've not seen anything dodgy flagged via my UniFi switch that I'm plugging this through. There's been a few errant DNSs when I did have some of these applications installed. But again, a lot of that can be done to the way some of these containers are constructed when this device was originally built in China. And generally that is stuff that is always ironed, or say always, 99% of the time ironed out before these devices go full retail. But overall, software-wise, there's not much to dislike and quite a lot here for me to enjoy. Everything is where I need it to be. All of the logs are where I need them to be, the proactive notifications and alerts. Whether you want to directly provide, you require direct support and intervention and remote assistance from the brand is built in here. Something a lot of brands don't really add on day one of their software, and they add later on when they suddenly realize they have to. So it's good that that is there with the randomly generated API key and the user's behest to allow access to that. Same goes for individual user, be they admin or otherwise. This is an admin account. If I go into my user settings there, not only am I allowed once again to change that password and the rules for passwords as well as two-factor authentication, but alongside that, I can manage logged in devices, and if I like, kick off non-administrator devices if I choose to there. Setting up a lot of the notifications does still need a little bit of work. And I do think these are going to be settings that they are going to have to play around with later on. Setting up email alerts and what needs to be alerts, that's going to be the big pull here, because if you do want to set up alerts, you do want to set up what you're getting. You don't want to just get every single log alert. You want very tailored ones when there are issues, when there are things to be concerned with. And I do think that is an area, particularly with an AI implemented NAS, that's going to have an element of discretion potential. I do think they do need to kind of do a little bit more with their notifications on this. And I will say, with regard to the AI stuff, something I should have touched on earlier on, every single AI service was off when I got the device. When I got the device and booted it up and put on the latest firmware update, alongside SSH not being activated, alongside remote access not being activated, none of the large language modules were pre-downloaded, and none of the services were turned on by default. I had to manually activate these, which I know is going to be music to the ears of several of you. Also, before we move on, something I want to touch on, and just an idle errant thought that I thought I would try out. Let's bring the camera down here. I decided to just lump on and attach just a USB adapter, because this is a test I kind of stopped doing in the background of NAS Compares. The reason being because there were just too many NAS devices arriving on the scene that didn't allow for me to add an additional a network adapter via USB. For some reason, whether it is security limitations, whether it's the driver utilization, you know, there's plenty of Marvel and Realtek drivers knocking around on the scene. I'm pleased to say that when I attached that adapter, it appeared. So even though it only has two 2.5 gig network ports, I'm pleased to say that I can just add another one if I choose to there. So fair play to them. At least they've not disavowed the ability to add additional network connections to this device via USB. And now we're starting to see some 10 gig USB 3.2 Gen 2 X2 adapters out there that, yes, this will only really enjoy up to 5 gigabit networking there. It's nice that you've got that option on this system when it has that M.2 or Gen 3, when it has the 3.5 inch larger drive all rated together. The bottom line is this software is coming together very, very well. I hope it isn't released in this state. If I had to put a number on it, I would say 80 to 85% ready. There is some optimization required. Certainly this whole RAID rebuild limitation thing, I think they really need to rethink that. But at least in terms of the software platform here, there's a lot to like. And I know there's a fair few Debian OSs knocking around at the moment. And to say they borrow from one another would be a polite way to put it. But this is a really good example of some of the splinters and derivations of that platform as a whole. And there's not much to dislike here, and there's a lot to like. So if you do consider getting this down the road, that software for me is going in the plus column. I've mentioned it like 5 times in this video so far. This is not a review. It is an evaluation of a prototype that a brand has sent me. And if I can, I'll link below to the PDF of the report that I put together for these devices for a lot more technical back end of the system. Ultimately, what I'm seeing right now, it's a pretty good system. I will say it's got a ways to go. I don't like that RAID resync halt procedure that's built in. I do think the fact that I can expand the network connectivity on an ARM-powered system is something that should be more common than isn't, and I'm glad that they're doing. I think the design, clearly a conscious choice by the brand, is going to find its fans, not everyone, and it's quite bulky as well for a 4-bay desktop NAS when you compare it against similarly scaled systems like the Synology, the UGREEN DH4300 Plus, which is, by the way, a significantly hardware lesser system, so we give and take. And the cooling system, you may have heard the fans throughout this, with the cooling being located on the base. I do wonder about how much of the air can get around in here out of that top panel. Also, that top panel is something of a fingerprint magnet, as you may have noticed throughout the course of this. But again, how many people are actually going to be removing it? And I do wonder about having the LCD behind there, behind this panel. Is that something that's going to become visibility-wise a bit lessened? But apart from that, as prototypes go, this is probably one of the better fully formed devices that have been sent to me for evaluation. And I'm really interested to see where they're going to go on this. Now, the brand tells me, much like their previous generation device, that they're going to be pursuing crowdfunding. I know there's mixed feelings about that. And obviously, if you want traditional retail, if you want the guarantees of being a full-on traditional one-click consumer, Kickstarter's not going to be for you. But I will say, I get why they're going to put a device like this with this design and this architecture and that AI accelerator, which one day is going to be a lot more common than it is, but integrating it into it at the base level at the moment is rarer. I get why they're going crowdfunding, but without any confirmation of pricing, any confirmation of when it's going to roll out, we're still going to have to wait and see. But thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for this. A full review of this will happen down the road. I'm going to wait until more software updates, or if the brand highlights that there will be architectural differences in the hardware, that will delay things, because I'm not going to do a full review on a prototype that ain't going to be what you're going to get. But thank you so much for watching. There's links below to find out more about this, and both on NAS Compares and the official website itself. And otherwise, I will see you next time.